Yep.
Okay, awesome. Hi. Hi, everyone. Good morning and a very warm welcome to Tech Plus 65's very first webinar. Thank you, everyone in Singapore, for pulling yourselves out of bed for this. And to those based in US or London, thank you for staying up. We found that actually one silver lining of this whole global stay-at-home arrangement is that all of a sudden online events at these really awkward timings, like early in the mornings or late at night, is now possible. So yeah, here we are. Seems like people are pretty open to tuning in as long as you don't have to kind of like shower and put on your work face before that. Let me just do a 1-minute spiel on Tech Plus 65 and a bit of ground rules for this session before we start. So my name is Hilary and I'm from the Singapore Global Network, or SGN for short. SGN is under the Economic Development Board of Singapore, and together with a couple of folks from the community, we actually set up Tech Plus 65 to bridge the tech community based in Singapore with other Singaporeans and friends of Singapore based overseas. We're still in our early days, so we really want to just thank you in advance for being patient with us. And also, please, we would like to get your help along this journey. So after this whole webinar, we'll be sending out a short survey. So do help us fill it in and give us your feedback. Just moving on to a couple of quick ground rules. Please mute your microphone and video. I think most of you are already muted because we just don't want things to get too overly crazy and noisy. We also would like to just encourage you to submit all your questions on the Q&A function. We did get you to submit also during your registration, so we'll be going through as many of those as we can. But if you have any questions, please add it onto the Q&A function and just participate actively. Yeah, and maybe with that, I will just get our three panelists or speakers to just give a quick introduction of themselves, maybe starting with Shiyan.
Hey guys, great to be on. Thanks for having us. I'm Shiyan. I run an early stage venture fund called Hustle Fund. I'm based here in Singapore, covering Southeast Asia. My partners sit in the Bay Area. I moved back to Singapore about 1.5 years ago after spending almost 20 years in the US, both as an investor and an operator. I helped to build a startup in San Francisco called NerdWallet, which is a financial services business. We took that business from 0 to 150 million in revenue over the 6 years that I was there. And so did a lot of crazy things, ran outsourced teams in Vietnam, launched customer success, ran online competitions. My last couple of years there, I ran business operations and corporate development, acquired a couple businesses. And so moved back for a couple things, for family. I have 2 young kids. And also I think for the opportunity that Southeast Asia presents. So I've spent the last 1.5 years writing checks in the region, getting to know the landscape. And I'm happy to answer any questions, as it pertains to the startup ecosystem, but also like, what's it like to move home after being away for a really long time?
Victor?
Hi, everyone. My name is Victor, and I'm currently with SGInnovate. SGInnovate I work for SGInnovate itself is a deep tech venture fund. We invest in companies that are built out of strong research-based IP. I was previously based in San Francisco for about 6 years, managing our fund and our operations there. Just got back last year. So I also went through a bit of changes in terms of the way I work and the companies I've been seeing. I also have a family, and we came back to Asia because we believe that Southeast Asia itself, in Asia, it will be the next growth engine for the world. And this is a great time to be because it's super early in the game. I think there's a lot more room for the whole ecosystem to move on. Yeah, I'm happy to answer. I work with mainly deep tech based companies, so slightly different around. We cover autonomous mobility. We invest a lot in the quantum space, covering companies within the healthcare space. So happy to answer any questions that relate to the space.
And Ming.
Yeah, morning everyone from Singapore. I'm Ming. I lead Tribe Accelerator. So Tribe Accelerator is a deep tech accelerator focusing on blockchain. We work with government agencies, the leading corporates and startups from all around the region, as well as some parts of the world. We look to build up the ecosystem from a perspective of technology being an enabler, more than just a buzzword itself. So I spent a bit of time in London a couple of years back, and now I'm back in Singapore running Tribe Accelerator.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got a pretty good coverage of both sectors and also geographies that each of you are familiar with. Okay, let's kickstart with the first question that actually many of you submitted during the registration, and there's different flavors of it, but actually the big question that everybody has is that given this whole COVID situation, what are some of the opportunities still? And maybe if I could just break this question into two parts. The first one being, what are opportunities for Singapore in this crisis and its aftermath? And the second part is actually, what are the opportunities in this Southeast Asia region that folks here in Singapore could take a chance to sort of delve into?
I can get started maybe, and then hopefully you guys can chime in. I mean, I think COVID has basically forced people, you know, it's like a major dislocation, right? It's forced people to behave in ways that they're not used to. You know, I've been teaching my parents how to use Zoom. I'm sure many of you have had similar experiences, but it's not just, you know, parents, like even your, you know, old school bosses who don't believe that, you know, work from home can be productive. You know, they're like, if I can't see you working, you know, I don't know if anything's really happening. So I think there's been a major like push that is accelerating adoptions of technology, and we're only just starting to see the beginnings of it. And once people come out on the other side, there may be some reversion to old habits, but the trend is being pushed like further. And so I think that is true, whether it is in Singapore or in the region more broadly, is that people just have to find new ways of doing business. And I think whenever there's a dislocation, it's like having a platform shift. There are opportunities for people to capitalize on that and take advantage of that. I think historically people have, you know, said, you know, B2B doesn't work in Southeast Asia because people don't want to buy software and things like that. But I think what businesses are experiencing now is that they can't operate in their own old ways, and they actually have to be more open to trying software to solve some of the problems because they can't be in person. And so I think there's a huge amount of opportunity for people who are interested in those types of problems to like really just sit and understand B2B workflows that could actually be improved a lot. And so I think we see a lot of opportunity in the telemedicine space. People are sort of adopting those things faster. In online education, I think you're seeing a lot of those things. And I think the key thing here is that you can't just take what you were doing offline and just throw it into Zoom, right? That doesn't work that way. You actually have to rethink how you want to deliver some of these experiences and make the technology work for you rather than trying to force old things into new media. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to take advantage of this dislocation. I think the things that are challenged are things that anything has like a face-to-face component. And they have to start thinking about how to get around that, right? Because obviously those things work less well when everyone's locked down in their houses. But I think the difference with the US and more developed economies is that there is a significant part of the population that makes its living in face-to-face interactions. And so, you know, how do you think about how to help those people? But from an opportunity perspective, like, I think there's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur because so many things are changing, right? The status quo is changing, and the chances of a startup being able to take advantage of that are much higher than of a corporate, right? Being able to do that. Like for the corporates, even with all their business continuity plans and whatever, you can still see companies that didn't even have enough laptops for their employees to work from home.
Yeah.
So they sort of had a plan, but they didn't really like follow through all the way on their plan. So I think there's huge amounts of interesting things to do right now.
So a lot of these trends that you mentioned are opportunities that I guess someone could take advantage of anywhere in the world. Are there things that you see that might be a little bit more relevant for someone who's based here in either, Singapore could be that boundary, or Southeast Asia? I'm not sure which one's more relevant to carve around, but let's say for someone from here or starting something from here, are there specific, nuances to some of those B2B workflows that you mentioned that may be bigger opportunities here than elsewhere?
I think I don't know whether it's bigger than elsewhere, but I think that the competition level here is lower than elsewhere.
Okay.
So like for a lot of B2B things that people have already adopted solutions in developed markets, you know, they're not as adopted here. So you just have less competition on that front. And a lot of the first wave of startups in this region were very consumer focused. They weren't really that B2B focused. And so I think the competition level is lower here.
Okay. Victor, Ming, any views on that also?
So I think on our end, looking at the deep tech space and the companies within the space. So I'll just define deep tech on our terms, which is companies that have products and services that are clearly defensible by very strong IP. You know, as a firm, we look mainly at a few categories, and I mentioned earlier, like around autonomous mobility, healthcare, industry, you know, and fintech. And I think this current situation has actually brought about a couple of very interesting changes in the way folks have behaved in Singapore. So beyond this, right, and environmentally, like what Shiyan has already pointed out, a lot of companies are not very prepared for this. So whether it's a bank, you know, or to your mom and pop kind of outlet, they are not prepared to handle a lot of things digitally. Right? I've seen a lot of friends who run like tuition businesses, folks like my kids' preschools. You know, no one is ready to move from a offline to an online type of learning. You know, no one is ready to move from an offline to online type of business. For example, folks that I know that run restaurants, that run small stalls, you know, they're having a lot of issues trying to enhance their business in a time when people are not physically allowed to be eating in a location, right? So this has actually given rise to a lot of digital services, which like Deliveroo, Food Panda, you know, and GrabFood, in trying to capture that. But the thing is, their business models don't really help to optimize for folks who are charging very low prices, right? So is it the fault of the folks charging $5 for a plate of char kway teow, you know, or is it the fault of the business model, right? So I guess, you know, something has to change, right? But this is going to be a fundamental change. I think the one thing that I realized about Singapore is that because some things are priced so lowly, a lot of the things we do digitally are not able to appeal to them. Right, and I use food delivery as a very simple example because, you know, it's obvious that, you know, that a lot of digital platforms are ready to capture, you know, the food business. So now we have about 5,000 restaurants in Singapore, you know, who cannot have patrons sitting in, right? But everyone's having problems trying to do fulfillment, you know, and logistics, and just matching. So you still have, you know, people just go on Facebook creating these crazy groups of 100,000 followers, just individually posting about these stalls, right? And discover.
It's insane.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, like
Yeah.
we are in an age where, you know, we can do so much shit, right? And we still have to go on a post by post basis looking for hawkers. I mean, like, so there are problems, right? And I think you know, this situation has brought out a lot of interesting ways that we can solve these problems. From my end, I haven't seen. On deep tech side, it's a bit tough because like my guys are all in a different type of challenge because most of them are doing long-term based research, and a lot of them are doing R&D. Right, but for a lot of the folks that we've seen who are looking at the consumer business and looking at B2B2C, right, I think this opportunity is really astounding. But I don't think anyone's moving fast enough. You know, people, even the businesses are trying to figure out what's the best way to make the business still work. You know, do we take a cut of the commission, you know, and ramp up users? You know, what's the solution? So no one actually has come to any kind of answer on that. In terms of the bigger picture, right? I think this situation has brought about something that to me is very clear, in that we are extremely dependent on everyone else for so many things. Singapore as a country, right? So if you look at food, so to me this has brought out the real need for us to diversify things like our food sources. Because if you look at it, you know, Singapore is only self-sustainable for food up to 30% of our supply, right? And we just went from, you know, from the politicians saying that, you know, we are okay, we have enough stockpile, to like, you know, our stockpile may be affected because of global logistics flows, right? So what happens in the longer run? You know, how does Singapore circumvent? So this idea of Singapore being self-sustainable, whether it's for food or for other things, how do we think about that as a problem that we can solve? A lot of entrepreneurs in Singapore are trying to solve that problem by trying to do, you know, to do like lab-based meats, but these things are expensive and not to scale yet. So I'm thinking I'm just wondering if there are better ways to solve this problem, right? And food is only like one of the very obvious ones, and there are others within Singapore's entire ecosystem, and even Southeast Asia, right? That we can probably think about solving. Okay, I'll stop here, and I'll save some of the other bits for the conversation later.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's for me, I think definitely interesting times that we are living in. Forces, like I think what Shiyan and Victor mentioned, forces us to rethink a lot of processes. I remember a few years back talking to B2B companies, and they were saying it's going to be hard for me to like really want to move online like fully, because I'm doing well in retail, a lot of opportunities. I'm still making like money and I'm like happy with it, right? But today, like you can't open your stores. So how do you really take opportunity of these times? Or are you like scrambling out there to really get your logistics in order? Victor mentioned one point on the fact that how do we match logistic drivers? A lot of people have lost their jobs in the market itself, but they're willing to be logistic couriers and delivering your food, your groceries and stuff, but they can't find the right jobs at this point in time. So I think that at the end of the day, a platform business is to match supply and demand. And if we can do it at this moment efficiently, I think you tap on a new opportunity. And a lot of times, back 2 to 3 years, you will see that actually Southeast Asia, it's not very keen on self-serve platforms for B2B as compared to like Europe or US itself, where it's much more mature and people are willing to go online self-serve. We heard of companies that they have more account managers than accounts, because they need 2 to 3 account managers to serve an account, like for self-serve startups. So I think the entire ecosystem is changing. People are looking at definitely how do we tap on online services, and because this entire process is accelerated and people are forced to do it, things are moving much faster. In terms of education, people are forced to do things like going online to do Zoom. We don't hear tuition centers like offering Zoom like that many tuition centers offering Zoom like back then, but today is like the norm. So like everyone will probably have a Zoom app. I would say majority of population will probably have a Zoom app, as long as they are in some form of service business, to just communicate through this entire period itself. So it's much easier to educate after this crisis itself. And I think there's definitely lots of opportunities from a platform business perspective.
Maybe to just build on that, and also something that Shiyan mentioned in the beginning, which are some of these opportunities? I mean, in terms of maybe just self-serve platforms, as you called them, which are ones that are, immediate reactions to this whole situation, and which would actually be longer term? Because I think what everyone's sort of afraid of is we do not want to just immediately react and jump onto the bandwagon, but rather see this whole crisis as a catalyst for something that will still sustain even after everyone goes back to normalcy, so to speak. Because things like education and all that, I think the question is, part of it will be, it's just temporal, this situation, and once we go back to having physical classes, physical schools, for example, would people still sign up for all these online platforms, or is there some element of that can still last into the longer term?
I think things like telemedicine services, something that people don't commonly use in Singapore, but recently like one of our startup, White Code, is doing really well in the space of telemedicine, because in the past people just say, oh, okay, maybe I'll just go to the clinic, my company has a card, I can claim from there, so on and so forth. And they go to physical clinics and collect medicines during lunch or after work and stuff like that. But today it's like you don't really have a choice. So people start understanding, hey, there are actually more options than what I'm actually used to. So it's breaking the habit cycle, I feel. And once they start knowing that there are more convenient options, today I can sit in my home to talk to a doctor. If it's nothing serious, I can get my medicine delivered to me within 90 minutes. And I think having that form of understanding that there are more options will actually help these startups grow, and self-serve startups starting to get more awareness and understanding from the market itself.
I think there's two examples I might give on the education point. I mean, I think there's two parts to education, right? One is like paid childcare, and then the other part is actual content delivery. And so, paid childcare, that's something you can't, physically it's helpful. Someone else watches your kids. But from a content delivery perspective, if you talk to tuition center owners, right, it's largely driven by the quality of the teacher. But one teacher can only handle so many kids. Like that's their bottleneck, right? It's like how many great teachers can they attract to their business? And so you could sort of see a world in which a superstar teacher, and you see models like this in China, can actually address hundreds of kids. And maybe you pair that with, a more hybrid online and offline model. So you create something that's actually more scalable for sort of, those superstar teachers and for tuition centers. And I think that can persist even beyond, the crisis. The childcare part, anyone who has kids knows that, like, I'm willing to pay teachers a lot more after having to homeschool my children. So, that's a lot of work. The second thing is, my colleague, his family runs a bakery restaurant. And obviously they can't operate in this period. And so his brother has had to pivot to like baked goods subscription. Like, okay, we'll deliver bread to your house on a regular cadence and things like that. And, I could see this persisting as a revenue line for them after the crisis, that people get used to the idea that like, hey, I can just have great fresh bread delivered to my house. And that is like a nice sustainable source for him that doesn't, it's more predictable. It doesn't require people to come into his restaurant and things like that. But it's something that I don't think that they would necessarily have even wanted to try before the crisis, right? Because it was like, hey, I got my business, it's working. Like, let's just keep going. And I think for hawkers, something we talk about is that the older generation doesn't want to, they're getting older, their kids don't want to work in that business. Like, how do those traditions endure and succeed? And so if you can actually build more sustainable business models for them, maybe there is a way, that you can keep some of our amazing hawker culture, but enable it to be less so manual and physical, or so, subject to the whims of, their day-to-day. Just some thoughts there.
Sorry, I had a thought, but I forgot what is it. I think
Distracted by childcare.
Yeah, oh yes, okay, yes. So I think what this current situation has really given us is desperation, right? So people are desperate, and therefore they have no choice but to turn to digital. So now we have a massive on-ramp. There's a lot of people coming in. Unfortunately, a lot of them are actually disappointed by the user experience, right? Because a lot of these businesses, as Shiyan pointed out very, very rightly, is that they were not ready for digital engagement. So when it comes to tuition centers, even my son's childcare who does lessons also, a lot of this transition from content providing from in a physical form to a digital form, it has been terrible, right? So the user experience, for example, like my friend's tuition center does like thousands of students, right? They've moved to full Zoom, and they still keep the teacher-student ratio, but just the experience of so I've seen like different centers do it differently, right? There's some who do it on YouTube. There's some who do live, like 1:5 students, and they physically eyeball the students and what they do. I've seen like live ballet lessons, and the teacher essentially doing the timing, and then telling the girl, no, you need your leg needs to move higher. I think these are still very early, very, very rudimentary ways of doing digital-based lessons. But I think there is a space for us to improve on the user experience, right? And that will be where we can probably increase the retention of a lot of these folks that we're on-ramping now. Because as everyone has said, if once the crisis is over, right, then people go back to normal means, right? But would we have wasted this huge mass of people that we just brought on? So I think at this point, a lot of companies need to think about, once they get people on, what is a retention strategy, right? Is it converting part of the business into a SaaS-based model? So taking people from the competition. So for example, a lot of centers, have been trying to do online learning. Some of them do it better, some of them do it worse. Some of them charge higher, some of them charge lower. So for the people who are charging lower, they are providing a digital engagement which is of a higher quality. Is that a way for them to capture the competition's students? Right? I think there are a lot of. It's interesting to see how these things evolve as I listen to a lot of my friends complain about and how they are trying to catch up, to doing things offline. And this has been the biggest thought in my head. How do I help them to do retention? Right? Can I think, and just like Shiyan brought up, for the food and for the folks in doing food delivery and for hawkers, right? How do we retain these guys on the platforms? Now it's all about, so on the Facebook groups I see is the kids saying, my dad runs a char kway teow store, and then he or she is the one posting about the char kway teow, the price. So it's not the parents who are getting involved, but the kids are getting involved. So it's good, but now how do we help the kid to hold on to the business or find some way to do this in a better way? So yeah, I mean that's so to me I think there's a lot of opportunity in retention, for that purpose.
Okay. Maybe if I could sort of use that to segue into the next bucket of questions that we got, when people registered, which is just about this whole support from VCs during this period. And maybe we could take this question to mean both the monetary side and also the softer aspect like mentorship and advice and everything. I liked one of the submissions. I think this person must be doing snow sports. They said, there's a lot of VC dry powder in Southeast Asia right now. When do you think funding will pick up again? And maybe just to build on this question a little bit, is it true that there is VC dry powder now? Is that what you guys are also seeing for the region?
Yeah, I mean, I think publicly, right, a lot of funds have announced that they've closed their new funds. So, that's all public information. You can look at the press releases, and folks are definitely open for business. I think that what VCs have been doing and, what we've been doing with our own portfolio is that, first you triage your own portfolio and you figure out like who needs help. For all those people who thought they were going to go out and raise in Q2, obviously that's not really a great time to raise right now. And so what are you going to do in the meantime? And then once you're done triaging your portfolio, you continue to evaluate new opportunities. I think history has shown us that, downturns are actually great times to be active investors. Lots of great companies get started in downturns, and valuations become more reasonable. So I think, this lockdown, I think for VCs, like one thing, is that a lot of people are just used to meeting face to face. And I think a lot of investors might feel some discomfort in deploying capital into a team they have not met in person. And so the current lockdown, circuit breaker, may slow things down on that front. But I think if you have prior relationships with investors, that you're kind of a known quantity, you can continue to push the conversation along and things like that. I think you can still make progress, but trying to start a new process right now is probably pretty challenging. And I don't think I would recommend that anybody try to start a new process until possibly early summer. So yeah, but who knows, right? Like there's so much unpredictability right now. And yeah, I'd be curious what Victor and Ming think as well.
Yeah.
I think in the current situation, so there's dry powder for sure, and as Shiyan pointed out, I think at least 4 or 5 funds have announced about $200 million raises in the past 1.5 years. So there is a lot of powder, right? I think the current focus for most of the funds right now are on trying to make sure that their own portfolio is sustainable through this crisis. Right? So minimally, so what we tell our portfolio is minimally this crisis is one, and then beyond that we have to prepare you for a recession, right? So we need to make sure that they have runways that are sufficiently long, and a lot of our powder will be used for that. Right. So whether it's providing a bridge round for companies that we believe will come up better at the end of this whole mess, and also pulling in co-investors who want to participate in these bridge rounds, right? I think now it's about figuring out what are the government. So beyond the VCs, there are government grants and non-dilutive financial means that we can help companies with to sustain them. In terms of investing in new companies, we haven't stopped looking at new companies, right? And deal flow continues to be reasonably strong. And for deep tech space, because a lot of these companies take a long time to get to market anyway. So the crisis doesn't really affect them as much. What it does affect is our due diligence. Right, so for us to be able to do due diligence on like a piece of hardware, we need to physically see it, right? We need to physically be there and look at it and how it performs. For the software-based ones, it's a bit easier, but as Shiyan pointed out, the business is also a lot about face-to-face, and I want to see an entrepreneur and stare him in his eyes and see if he's the real deal, and find out what it is that he's trying to achieve. So yes, yes, there is dry powder. Yes, I think a lot of investors are still looking out. Everyone's looking for a good deal right now, right? Because, and I don't think we're peaked, right? The crisis hasn't peaked. We are nearly at the beginning. So everyone's looking for a good deal. Everyone's looking for interesting companies to invest in. So there will be companies still coming out. It is a terrible time to raise. So, unless you already have investors lined up, it's not a good time to start. Those who are in the process have no choice to keep going. We have asked a lot of companies who are in the midst of the process if they can't really close it, whether they want to do an early close or they want to go to a bridge, to just get the money in and just hunker down for the time being. So I think, it hasn't dampened the industry as much, but I mean, it depends on the types of investments you're doing also, lah. Ming, any insights from your space?
So yeah, I agree with both Victor and Shiyan that there's sufficient dry powder with funds coming out, especially within the last 2 years that were really good years for VCs fundraising before the crisis itself.
Yeah.
But definitely in the short-term space, VCs definitely tighter on their purse, looking into more numbers, supporting existing portfolio, a lot of firefighting, because the tech VC space in Southeast Asia came up in maybe majority of them came out in the 2010, 2012, 2013. So this is the first, I think, major crisis that a lot of them are facing. So LP might also want to slow down their commitments or drawdowns into funds. So it's harder for VCs to raise from LPs as much as startups raising from VCs itself. So it's a domino effect. But in a long-term perspective, a lot more capital in the region. The report that came out by Bain, Temasek, and Google last year forecast that the e-commerce market will hit 300 B by 2025. So still huge opportunities right after the crisis. And I'm still receiving texts from people to say, hey, if you know any good deals, cheap deals, let me know. I want in on this sort of stuff. So for our accelerator program itself, we are still moving online, connecting the startups with VCs itself, and it's still generally positive. The turn down rate maybe at this moment, maybe 15% of VCs are saying, or maybe I'll pause a while. But 85% of the people that reach out to are still, hey, I want to meet the startups. I don't mind meeting them online, but maybe I won't deploy as fast or it will take longer. But it's also a good time for startups to show the VCs that they are able to weather through the storm at this current process. So I guess showing the numbers right now and showing the numbers maybe 4 to 6 months later and how you have grown within this period of time. If you can show growth within a crisis, I think that's extremely positive from a VC's perspective. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Yeah, this is actually one example of pivoting, right? Could you share a little bit more about the online accelerator program and maybe some key elements of it? Because I know both Victor and Shiyan mentioned that, for when you really, there's that whole physical aspect that cannot be missed. You want to look the entrepreneur in the eye and all that. So which aspects of the accelerator program can still be run online? I think that would be quite interesting.
I think majority of the accelerator can be done online because it's a lot of times it's about matching, supporting the startups to meet corporates, to meet VCs, investors and stuff like that. So a lot of things can be done on Zoom. Same process as the actual physical. It's just the experience. I think that's what everybody is talking about. Like, can you really look at the founders in his eyes? Because early stage startup is a lot about betting on founders more than betting on ideas. Because you know that this guy, I think he's capable of taking this business to the next level. So apart from demo days, which is something we decide to cut for now, but that's usually like the fanfare, the rah-rah and stuff like that. But that's not needed because a lot of value is not captured during demo days. It's actually more of outgoing presence to show people that, hey, I'm doing something. It's good optics. But I think at this point in time, a lot of value is still captured between the mentorship sessions for startups to understand what experienced entrepreneurs are thinking. How did they overcome previous crises, and what are the learning points, and when should they take certain strategies or pivot or stuff like that. So I think that learning is more valuable at this current moment itself, but most of the value is still being captured.
Okay, and again, I think that's also quite a nice segue into maybe one final question for the three of you before we move on to answer some of the questions in the Q&A section. So actually quite a number of people, and I don't know how many tuning in here are actually running their own startups, but people were asking, for advice that you might give them. And one big one, and we had a quick discussion just before we started this, is this the time? You mentioned that this is not the best time for startups to be raising right now, especially if they don't have like prior things set in place. But is it a good time for startups to really pursue a more aggressive kind of business strategy? Like, should they be looking at profitability and everything right now, or is this, should they be a bit more conservative in their approach to things? What's your take on this? And it was a bit of a catch-all question, but feel free to contextualize. And
I think it depends on the type of business that you're in, right? So I mean, like, if you're in a business currently that allows folks to move from offline to online. So like, if you were like a Zoom at this point in time, I'll ask you just go for it, man. I mean, I think the opportunity is right for some types of companies. It is not right for a lot of companies, right? So for those, like for the ones that we deal with, like folks who are doing healthcare-based research, who are doing like hardware like lidars, radars, and even folks who are working on sensors and industrial types of companies, it is not a good time because they are not going to get revenue. The customers are going to be stuck, right? And so right now the next few quarters, their numbers are going to be terrible if they have any numbers at all. They can only hunker down and do their research, right? So for a lot of these companies, they can still raise money and for the research and for the hope that what they do at the end of this, will be useful when this whole thing dies down. So there are so it's a bit more contextual. It depends on the type of business you're trying to do. And I don't think there's a one answer that can satisfy everyone for this. Shiyan, Ming, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a false dichotomy between like profitability and growth. It's like you don't start a business to raise money. You start a business to make a business, right? So like in some point in time, the business got to work, and there's some basic laws of business. You make a thing, people pay you for the thing you made, and they pay you more than it cost you to make the thing. So I think that the priority one for startups is like survival. Okay, how are you going to make it through the next 12 months, right? And I think part of survival is like looking at the key drivers of your business and understanding how those things all ladder up to what you believe is eventually a profitable business, right? Did the unit economics of what you're doing actually make sense? And so I think all of the sort of R&D projects that you were doing, like if you think about like there's your near-term business, there's your like Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3, like you're probably going to like lower your investment on Horizon 3, cut back your investment on Horizon 2, and really focus on Horizon 1, right? Which is like things that work, and that when you put in $1, you get back $1.50 or whatever the case may be. And so, and I think the way to also think about it is, if you were to go raise right now, and you're running a business that's burning cash, how does that stack rank to everything else that investor is looking at? Right, so it's not just about your opportunity in isolation, but it's also relative to everything else that an investor is looking at. And it doesn't mean that it's a bad idea, or it doesn't mean that it's like not worth doing. You just have to think of it, that if it doesn't look as attractive as other things, then like what are other ways that you can figure out to survive? And so, I think we've had portfolio companies do a range of like interesting things to do that. Like they've gotten like R&D grants, right? So like, if you have a Canadian founder, Canadian government gives out a lot of R&D grants. So they've been doing that. I know Singapore has R&D grants as well. People have started selling like annual subscriptions to things to try to get like cash in right now versus like a monthly. So I think there's like a lot of things that you have to think about from like a survival perspective. And so this sort of like, should I switch to profitability? It's like, well, if you weren't growing the types of customers you wanted anyway, like what is the value of those customers? So yeah, I don't know if that's like a helpful response, Hillary.
Yeah. Ming, your thoughts on this?
I think adding on to what Victor has mentioned on the fact that it really depends on the industry and there's no one answer to all. So take for example, this company, Service Hero, they were basically connecting like electricians, plumbers and stuff to businesses and consumers. But now they are doubling down their business to do this infection. So getting disinfection cleaners to go into buildings to do that and making a lot of revenue at this point in time, which is great. So businesses like that, VCs will usually pump in more support for them, maybe from digital marketing, from different aspects itself, to support their growth, because these are the ones that is 80-20 at the end of the day in this crisis. So you really want to help those that can grow, but also how do you help your existing portfolio that are affected by this crisis stay afloat, survive? So maybe it's pumping in more capital. So that's why, going back to the previous question on VC, there's dry powder, but where is it actually going at this point in time? It's a lot more to helping the existing companies. That's what we are seeing. But if your business is like hardware and production lines are stopped and stuff like that, it's really a time for you to take a look back and say, okay, what are important resources that I need to have? Or how can I adjust my business such that when crisis comes down, and then we can really take this forward and double down on the activities that we are doing itself. So it's business dependent.
Okay, thank you. Maybe let me now move on to taking some questions. Raymond, I saw you posted some, so I'm gonna just repeat your question for everyone here. But please feel free to jump in if you like to contextualize it a little bit more. I think Raymond was picking on something that Shiyan mentioned to the first question. I think you said that because I was asking, what are some of the opportunities amongst, for example, the B2B workflows that may be more relevant for this region, and then you said that actually one of the things here is the competition might be lower. So I think he wanted to just sort of examine that statement a little bit more. And if we look at that from a different perspective and ask ourselves, like, why is the competition lower? Does it mean that we're not really ready? And yeah, what do we need to do to be more ready and more competitive? Maybe not just for Shiyan, but for Victor and Ming as well. If do you agree with that statement, that competition here would be lower for some of the opportunities that we spoke about in the first round, like telemedicine and B2B workflows, so on and so forth?
So I believe that it is true, right? There is definitely less competition in Singapore, even in the region, and as versus what we see, in America, right? But that's probably because of the nature of our ecosystem. If you think back, for those who've been around long enough, this is probably cycle like 2.5. This is like the second, so the first major startup cycle was around the 1999, 2000 era, when the first .com boom started, and then in between there was some kind of like ecosystem that didn't really fully mature, and then the really latest version of what you see today has been around for about since 2012, 2013. So I think like in terms of as far as cycles go, we are super young, and we have a very nascent kind of startup ecosystem, and that contributes to the amount of competition, right? Just because there are not as many businesses. In Singapore, unfortunately, we are also bogged down by the size of our country. We look at the region, but a lot of entrepreneurs do not have the right balance of experience and expertise to take on the region, But I think that yes, there's less competition. And I would say that the opportunities to be the leader in each market is increasingly starting to slim down, and that, however, doesn't mean that business is that much easier to run, right? I mean, like running a startup in Asia, in Southeast Asia, and in Singapore, basically means you don't get to raise as much money, right? Your valuations are much lower. Talent is not as easily found, even though talent is a problem globally, and in general, because people have not experienced enough cycles of startup growth, we also don't have enough experienced people who can take companies to different stages of their lives, right? So there are some I would say base ingredients that we are still trying to grow. And that contributes to the overall lack of competition in general, right? But having said that, there are competitors. There are big players, that are trying to take the region as a whole. And depending on what you're trying to do, I think I think this is a good time to kind of like be a part of that competitive landscape, right? Yeah, I hope that answers. I hope that answered the question in a more roundabout way. So there is competition. The competition it doesn't mean that it makes it any easier to run a business though, you know. And but that also means that you have an opportunity to start something up and potentially, you know, take on all the competition.
Yeah, and maybe to like, I totally agree with all of Victor's comments. I actually think that's the opportunity for, if there are people on this call who are from other ecosystems and you're thinking about moving back, I actually think that's your opportunity, because you've already been exposed. Maybe you've worked in a high growth company before. You kind of know what good looks like. Then, you know, the thing that you're solving for is more about like local market knowledge. And it doesn't mean that like you can't build great businesses here, but you have to figure out how to bridge the shortcomings of the ecosystem with your other resources. So I'll give you a few examples, which is like, you see a lot of entrepreneurs in region who are European. Some of them are Rocket alumni. Some of them just like left their countries because there's nothing for me here. I want to go to Asia. And they wind up either, let's say, running their tech teams out of Ukraine or Estonia, you know, or Bulgaria, because that's where, you know, they have networks, right? Because it's actually quite hard to hire tech talent in Southeast Asia. It's hard to hire tech talent everywhere, but in Southeast Asia, you know, so they leverage basically other pieces of resources that they have from their own personal networks to kind of balance out some of the challenges that, you know, they face in region. And so they can manage. So I think you have to think about it like, what is the full set of assets that I bring to the table and where do I have an edge, right? So I think that the competition point is more that like, if you try to start an analytics company in the US, there's like 100 analytics companies and you're selling against all of them, right? And all the YC analytics companies are selling to all their YC batchmates. Like the competition level is different, right? Here, how many analytics companies are there here? But at the same time, like a US analytics company not paying attention to Southeast Asia, they've got a bigger market to deal with. So if you can sell some, but does that mean that Southeast Asian companies don't need analytics? No, right? They also need analytics. So I think there's like, I think you have to think about it from the perspective of like, what is the edge that you bring? What are the unique assets that you bring to the table? And then how can that help you compete? And I would say that most people who come from the Valley back to Singapore and to the region and they look around, the realization is, holy shit, I should start something. Versus like, oh, maybe I should go work for someone. Because they're like, wait, like there's stuff that seems like super obvious to go and do. And if you can assemble a credible team, you can launch a reasonable MVP, people will fund you, because the thing that is in short supply in Southeast Asia is like experienced founders. And so there is a premium paid to experienced founders. Now, whether that premium is justified or not, you know, we can talk about that. But but I think like that stuff matters, because like you're not shooting yourself in the foot with like newbie mistakes. You're still gonna have market issues, right? Like operating in Indonesia is like super different from operating in the US. But, you know, I can tell you like, you know, one of the furthest along YC companies in Indonesia is founded by an Australian Chinese guy who has no relationship to Indonesia. Okay, he was like, I'm gonna go start something, I'm gonna go figure it out. You know, he built a team, he's raised a bunch of money, he's doing pretty well, but you know, he compensated for it, right? He brought other assets to the table, he found an Indonesian co-founder, you know, he's done all this other stuff, he's been excellent at hiring pretty aggressively. So, you know, there isn't sort of like one pathway to do it, but anybody I think who has worked in high quality, high growth startups in the US or other ecosystems brings really something different, because they have that experience and you have a network that extends kind of beyond the local ecosystem.
Actually, maybe on this point, we have one question from Yen, and it's actually something that I've also personally heard quite a bit. He said that it feels like one piece of advice for founders in Southeast Asia is to start something for the region or Indonesia to ultimately be successful, as opposed to, I guess, starting something for Singapore as a market. So he asked, what are some things someone should consider while looking for a challenge to tackle? Focus on enterprise or cater to tier 2 city populations to get enough scale? Any advice there?
I mean, the most obvious one would be if you start a business and just for Singapore, you are pretty much screwed from the beginning. I think you won't be able to scale. You won't be screwed, but I mean, you won't be able to scale, right? So not to the kind of venture scale that you're thinking about, when we look at big venture companies. Let me just look at the question again.
I think
Yeah, so I think for a lot of the ways we advise our companies is you need to minimally look at the region, which is Southeast Asia. It may not be Southeast Asia. It may be like the Middle East. It may be parts of North Asia, which is a bit more challenging. Or it could be some other place, right? But Singapore is not the final market. It is a great place to start a business. It's a great place to develop, to protect your IP, do development, but it's a terrible place for your business to end because the scale itself is not there. Looking at the question, I think it's moving. If you're looking at like going into tier 2 cities like in Indonesia, in the Philippines, so the one thing about Singaporean founders or even Western founders that go into, so I'm half Indonesian. I grew up in Indonesia, and I've looked at how people have developed in terms of like the startup landscape, and also how founders have also tried to innovate on themselves. And the one big challenge I feel for a lot of folks coming from Singapore or coming from a more developed country like the US or the UK is understanding how locals behave. Right. If you're going into in the consumer business, I think that will be something that you will need to get some complementary help on. The behavioral patterns and the way business works in a lot of the cities in Southeast Asia is a bit different. Right. So unless you have some kind of resource that you can tap onto there, it might be a little challenging in the beginning. Going into enterprise would be interesting, but it depends on what type of enterprise. Like, let's take the example of something like a Dropbox or a Box, like someone who's trying to sell a business like a Box into like Indonesia. Are people ready to pay money for a service? What kind of enterprise types of business are you trying to do? Is it enterprise-based sales? Are you selling analytics businesses to other companies? Maybe like a supporting type of business to a much larger enterprise could be useful, but a lot of the consumer-facing ones, would require a bit more thought, I believe. Guys, any thoughts?
I think from my point of view itself, a lot of times when people look at targeting like second-tier cities and stuff, a lot of time it's to reduce cost per acquisition because there are existing incumbents in the capital or in the tier 1 cities at this existing moment. But I think what this crisis has got us to rethink is that for a new company that wants to target a tier 1 city, because the existing incumbents are facing or fighting fire because of their existing size of team, existing challenges that they have to deal with, it's a good opportunity. And that's what I think competition is lower at this point in time because it's easier to penetrate the market in times of crisis. People are more patient. People are more forgiving. So in the past, you order food delivery and it comes within 1 hour and you're like, oh, it's too long. But today, if it comes within 2 hours, on some days when it's raining and things like that, you are saying, oh, okay, it's fine because everyone is also waiting. So people are more willing to be more forgiving at this point in time, which is actually better for new startups because new startups are generally not, processes are not as smooth. So it's actually good opportunity. And second thing, I think also talent itself. It's now with more people starting to get out of job because a lot of companies, it's not because they are not good talents, but because a lot of companies just can't sustain. So there's a lot of opportunities to hire very good talents. And I think going back to the point where Victor mentioned about today, a lot of things that we do it's a lot about bringing whatever that is physical, how we did it in physical manner, online. So a lot of times it's just replicating the process. But if we can up that game by improving the UX itself in this time, I think that brings us to another level of competitiveness to really target new opportunities in the market itself.
Okay. Maybe now, in the interest of time, I'm just going to take one last question from the floor, and then we can hear from each of you, and then maybe wrap this whole thing up. It was anonymous, but I think, yes, a couple of people want to build on it. How is your venture capital firm changing the way that it's assessing startups, or if at all, during this situation? And I think an associated question also is, what do you look out for when you make investment decisions?
Mm.
I guess there's two parts to it. One is in general, and then the other is, has that changed at all during this whole crisis period, if at all?
Sorry, I'm trying to find a question. Is it on the Q&A?
Yeah, I can start if you want. I would say that for us, it's business as usual. We've always run our team remotely and via Zoom. That's how we manage our portfolio. So really nothing has changed for us. But you know, we're a pre-seed fund. We're not a deep tech fund, right? So I think it's a little bit different and it'll vary case to case. And so the things that we look for, really, I don't think the list will be super different from any other person doing deals right now. But you know, is there a big market? You know, what's the product look like? Do you have any early indicators of traction? Why is this the right team to do it? Why is this the right time to do it? And I think for us, maybe the one thing that we do emphasize a little bit more than others is like, we're very focused on customer acquisition costs. So like, you know, our big belief is that there are a lot of great products in the world, but they fail because you can't get them into the hands of customers in a cost-effective way. And so we spend a lot of time with founders understanding how they think about their customers, how they're going to reach them, and why it makes sense from a just pure math perspective.
On our end, so we've done a huge assessment of our entire portfolio. We have a massive portfolio, you know, and I think for us it's trying to first figure out what is their runway at this point in time, right? Trying to figure out, because a lot of our companies we invest everything in everything from seed all the way to about Series C, you know. So it's a bit crazy in the way in how we visualize the company's lifespan. But for let's start with the early stage companies. On the earlier side, most of them would have at this point less than 12 months of runway. A lot of them are still in research phase, you know, which means they have no customers. They may have some trials here and there, but generally a lot of them are pre-product. You know, so from that perspective, for a deep tech company, you know, okay, actually the category is the same. Where will you be, you know, at the end of this crisis, right? So if I were to give you some money to sustain you for maybe 12 to 18 months, you know, where would you be as a company then? And would you be in a better position to raise a much larger round, or to at least get funding then? Or, you know, would your business be as it is today? Meaning that, you know, yes, you may have had some improvements in the way in the research, but as a company you would not have moved, and therefore you would not be able to raise around then. So it means that I would have to sustain you for almost 2 cycles of funding, which may not make sense for a lot of funds, especially if the company is super early. So those are some very difficult questions that we need to ask ourselves, right, in terms of how we see the potential of the company, and whether the founders have the chops to carry the company through this crisis. Minimally, before we even put money into any company, whether it's a bridge or a round, at this point we need to ask them about what are their capital conservation thoughts. So what have they done to ensure that they have a much longer runway, but yet not compromising on the output at the end of the cycle, right? So, you know, this would involve things like pay cuts, you know, maybe like streamlining the team itself, and a lot of very difficult decisions that they need to make to ensure that the numbers make sense in terms of the runway and in terms of their track to progress, their milestones, right? For the later stage companies, the issues aren't as bad. A lot of them would have revenue already. You know, now it's a matter of figuring out where the customers are. Are they still able to sell to customers at this point in time? And if not, what are they doing in the meantime, you know, to make up for it? Some of them would think about, you know, doing a separate a revenue business. So in this case, with COVID being the talk of the town, you know, can they create a product or service that would help to address this problem? You know, and in a way, maintaining their brand, the mind share of the brand in the market, at the same time providing a revenue source for themselves. And maybe this could be, the main business after this whole thing is over. Who knows, right? So I think at different stages, the problems are quite different. And we're trying to figure out how we can help them to think this through, right? So on our end, we provide resources, everything from, we have a team that looks at, just pure talent acquisition. On my end, I help with all the investments. I make sure that they think about the fundraising cycle. I have a team that looks at business development that helps them to think about how they can engage with different types of customers. So business is as usual. Nothing has changed. We do have a larger priority now on sustaining our own businesses, but we are still looking at deal flow. We still need. So my overall investment objectives have not changed. I still have a timeline to deploy. So business as usual, but we need to be a bit smarter in these decisions. So meaning the company has to minimally survive through this crisis after they take my money, and then put themselves in a better position to raise a bigger round.
I think from my side, not much has changed. Just that we ask ourselves definitely more questions in terms of what constitutes defensibility for a startup itself, as we are running like a deep tech accelerator. So a lot of times the previous definition is like IP, patents and stuff like that as constitute of defensibility. But today it's, can this startup weather through a storm? I think that adds to another aspect of defensibility of this, the team, the founders, and the resilience. So I think so it's more questions that we ask ourselves more than changing the way we access startups. And is there, the next question on, is there now a stronger preference for healthcare related startups? I think if the startup makes sense from a like telemedicine perspective, I think that's something that we have already been looking at this current moment, to look at how new technologies can benefit telemedicine startups or delivery of medications, pharmaceuticals and stuff like that. So that's something that we have already been looking at. So no strong shift in preference because of COVID itself. Because a lot of times when VC invests in startups, it's for the next 3 to 5 years or even longer than that. So it's really not about the existing crisis at hand. I mean, there are good opportunities right now, but a lot of planning and a lot of investment is for 2 funding rounds down, 3 funding rounds down before you exit your portfolio companies itself. So it's a longer term horizon. And I think there are still opportunities in a lot of different sectors itself.
Oh, okay. So looks like people should still have hope. Okay, thanks everyone for all the very valuable insights and sharing this morning. Are there any other questions that you would like to address live? I know we are running slightly past time, but I don't know if there's any in the list right now that any of you want to sort of answer.
Maybe I can quickly answer like Jenny's question on why are there more B2C startups than B2B startups in Singapore and in generally in the region. I would say I think this is part of us being a very early stage ecosystem, right? When startup ecosystems evolve or as they start, the easiest things to usually work on are usually the consumer-based ideas, because that's what you and I know every day. Like so between Shiyan, Hillary, Ming, 4 of us sit down, you can easily think about an easy solution to a problem that we have every day. So a lot of the ecosystems in Southeast Asia have developed from that base, right? Which is how do we solve everyday problems for ourselves and for the people around us. Unfortunately, because that was the start, a lot of companies sprouted out in the space, but not many companies can survive. Right, so within the region, I would say there's only space for maybe like 3 to 5 per category to survive at the top, and the rest will just die, and the talent will have to be recycled. So I think eventually, as we start solving problems for everyone else, then we realize that the platform that we created will have problems of their own, which is where the B2B companies start to come in and start to think about how can I solve the problem for you, right? So I think it's a natural evolution. I always bring everyone back to how early an ecosystem we are, right? And that will help to answer a lot of the questions that and the problems that we see within the ecosystem today, right? So that's my short and easy answer to this, and yeah, it's an answer that's close to my heart because I've been involved in this for a fairly long time, doing different things, and yeah, it's important that we start off from the same base lah. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think also I would say that part of being a nascent ecosystem is like thinking about who are the types of people who start businesses and who are the types of people who like are rewarded for it. So I think historically our society has thought like the pinnacle of achievement, right, is to like go to fancy schools and get, work at a multinational or get a fancy high paying job, be a doctor, be a lawyer, things like that. And I think like for those people, the alternative of starting a company in Southeast Asia doesn't seem super attractive because you can always get paid more working at a corporate for less work, right? So it's like, well, like what does our society reward and like why is it sort of and then agree with you, Victor, right? It's like the availability of problems in our mind, right? It's like the people who start companies are the people who are the least to lose. So people who are fresh out of college and, they're like, what problem? So it's like, if you look at every college student or every college, they all try to start the same companies. There's a dating startup, there's a travel startup, there's a food startup, because those are the problems of a 22-year-old.
Yeah.
They don't start B2B companies. They're not like, oh gosh, this ERP system is really not working for me. And so that I think is so if you want to see the B2B companies come out, it's when you actually see like older professionals get so frustrated with a problem, but also be willing to take risk or see enough examples of people around them taking risk to be like, hey, I can actually do this better.
Yeah.
And so I think that's sort of the sort of evolution and the cycle that's happening. Another one is like HR companies. Everyone's like, let me start a recruiting business, right? So there are certain very common, like any university startup competition you judge is going to have these guys. They all look the same. And they don't really ask themselves the questions like, what's my edge in doing this? And so I really hope there's more B2B companies because I think these are really like hard problems that actually have a lot of efficiency that can be solved. And can have huge benefits for the ecosystem and help people really operate more effectively. But I mean, I think there was a pre-question like, oh, should I go to a tier 2 city or should I do an enterprise thing? I think the thing to remember is that startups are super hard. So like, if you're going to do something, you better pick a problem you care about because you have to deal with this every day. And most of the time it's going to suck. So like, you have to figure out what motivates you. And either it's like the team, like I'm a person who's very team motivated. Like I work really hard because I work with my friends and I don't want to let them down. So even when it sucks, like I want to work really hard for my friends, right? Or is the mission, you really believe in like improving access to healthcare or whatever the thing is, but it has to be something you actually like care about, and then the money will come later. But I think in general, like when you see founders give up, it's just like they don't care enough about this problem. Money is not enough. So just some thoughts.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you alluded to also is there's this whole element of the Asian culture thing going on, because if let's say the ones who are most likely to start off the B2B businesses or ideas are folks who are experienced, who actually experienced and went through the pain themselves, then there's also the other part of it, which is then you lose that whole I guess stability so-called of the easier way out with corporate job, blah 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 blah. So yeah, thanks. Ming, do you have any like thoughts on this as well?
I think agreeing with what both of them mentioned, a lot more experienced entrepreneurs will come out through this crisis itself to look at opportunities that they have seen that probably younger kids or younger entrepreneurs will not be able to see because of their experience 10, 15 years in MNCs and stuff to solve problems. Because every company, I think, face sort of like a scrambling mode when they were asked to work from home, to make things more efficient. Can the next Zoom take off that is even more efficient, simpler? Can the next HR solution company, the next wave of tuition centers come out that is totally different from what we see today, digital and more engaging, So I think these are huge opportunities that we are all seeing. And a lot of innovation folks today are also having more free time. So when we conduct meetings today, they are more willing to do calls and stuff instead of, oh, I'm traveling today around the world for meetings and stuff. So it's easier to catch hold of people. That's what we are seeing. And it's easier to get conversations going because everybody is facing the same situation. So everybody can see problems that are rising. So I think this is a time where looking at startups, looking at new entrepreneurial ideas, it's actually a good thing to do.
It's easier to catch people, like I said, at weird timings also. Okay, thank you very much, Ming, Victor, and Shiyan for your time this morning and for just sharing all your different experiences and perspectives with us. I'm going to just call a stop to this webinar and wrap it up. But if any of you are interested to ask them more questions, you can either add them on LinkedIn or you can join our Tech Plus 65 community. The QR code and the website is on the slides right now. It's actually currently a Slack community, so just sign up there and we'll add you. And also, if you're interested to hear more about news and other online events, you can sign up with the Singapore Global Network. Yep, so I think I'll just end off there. I don't know if you guys want to share any last pieces of advice or anything for the audience. It's quite a mixed crowd, I think. But yeah, thank you very much for spending your time early in the morning with us.
Just hit me up on Twitter. Please don't hit me up on LinkedIn. I hate LinkedIn.
Oh. Okay, so Twitter, LinkedIn, and LinkedIn presumably for the other two. But yeah.
Yeah,
we're good with LinkedIn.
Find my name.
Any way that you can contact us.
Yeah, thanks everyone for waking up so early for this. I hope it's been useful. And if you guys want to continue the conversation, just link up with us separately.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Hillary, for hosting.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.